John Bolton has never been shy about his hostility toward Iran. That's been true in all of his roles in public and private life, and no different since he has been National Security Advisor, a post he's been in for a little over a year now. Last September, he warned Iran that there would be hell to pay if it continued to lie and cheat and deceive. He went on to warn Tehran, "We'll come after you." Just last month, he said in a statement that the U.S. was sending a clear and unmistakable message to the Iranian regime that any attack on the United States' interests or on those of our allies would be met with unrelenting force. So, is John Bolton responsible for the ratcheting up of hostilities? And if so, is this approach the appropriate one? Joining me now, Reuel Marc Gerecht was a Middle East specialist at the CIA. He's now a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And Peter Beinart is a contributor to The Atlantic, a professor at CUNY's Newmark School of Journalism, and an old friend of the show. So let me ask you, Peter, it goes beyond John Bolton. I mean, in a sense, what's happened here is the Trump administration has deliberately backed Iran into a corner. It pulled out of the deal. It stopped issuing any waivers. So now Iran is sort of facing an economic death sentence almost. And do you think that it has been baiting Iran, in a sense, trying to get it to respond in some way?
Yes, not only do I think that, but the United States military, according to reports, thinks that. The Europeans think that. You know, there's this great line from the movie Cold Mountain where they say, they made the weather, and then they stand there and say, darn, it's raining, right? We pulled out of the Iranian nuclear deal, which the Iranians were complying with. We violated that deal brazenly. We then not only reimposed sanctions, but basically demanded that other countries not do business with Iran as well, basically to try to destroy the Iranian economy, which is producing immense suffering among ordinary people in Iran, who are oppressed not only by their own government, but now the fact that they can't buy medicines. And according to the New York Times, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunford, said this maximum pressure campaign will incite retaliation. The Europeans said it, and now, lo and behold, it's happened, and the Trump administration is shocked.
I'm guessing you have a different narrative as to what is going on.
Yeah, I mean, one, it was certainly when President Trump decided to withdraw from the JCPOA, which I think was a highly defective, deficient agreement, the Iranians were going to get upset. They liked that agreement for a variety of reasons. It was quite a good one from their perspective. So I'm not surprised that they've gotten cranky, and certainly the president has decided to engage in a massive pressure campaign against them. It's not just John Bolton driving that. I think there's pretty strong agreement between Bolton and Mike Pompeo on that. The famous 12-point speech was co-written by the two of them.
But to what end, Reuel? What I'm a little unsure of, it feels this kind of almost like a reflex more than a strategy. Is the goal regime change? Is the goal to get them back to the negotiating table? Is the goal simply to inflict pain? It seems to me it's pressure without a strategy behind the pressure.
I mean, I think there is a strategy, but I think it's fair to say that it's conflicted. The president obviously wants to have new negotiations. I think it's fair to say that John Bolton believes that would be a mistake. I think Pompeo probably is more in the direction of John Bolton, that he doesn't really believe that diplomacy is going to work with the Islamic Republic, but he is the Secretary of State, and he is certainly has said publicly that he's in favor of negotiations. So in the meantime, I think they're just going to adopt sort of a containment minus approach. That is, they're going to deny the Islamic Republic billions of dollars of hard currency. They aren't going to really push back against it regionally. But for the time being, they are going to block a land route in Syria until the president changes his mind and withdraws those troops. So there is a coherent approach there, but there are contradictions within it that I don't think they're debilitating, but they're certainly annoying.
Well, it does feel like it's sort of like maximum pressure and then watch and see what might happen and the dangers of miscalculation, escalation. I mean, but all of it, Peter, is premised on the idea that Iran is this uniquely dangerous country in the Middle East. And I want to ask you, I mean, is that fundamentally true?
No, I don't think so. I think Iran has got a brutal theocratic regime. I wish they had a better regime. I think, the Saudis, who are their main regional antagonists that we are arming and encouraging to take a more aggressive policy, recently, hacked to death an American journalist, right? So these are rough regimes in a rough part of the world playing a game of power politics. I see no moral distinction between the Iranians and the Saudis or the Emiratis, for that matter. And what we should be doing is trying to de-escalate and trying to have a leverage with both sides so we can prevent this Cold War from turning into a hot war. We have no idea, and John Bolton has no idea what would happen if we started a war. This man, John Bolton, has been calling explicitly for war with Iran for more than a decade, and he's never answered basic questions about what would happen the day after. For goodness sakes, in the shadow of the Iraq War, how can we tolerate an American government that was so cavalierly moving to the brink of a conflict, given what we know about the costs of the last one?
That does seem to be a reasonable question, which is all this pressure easily could lead to a spiral that gets us into a conflict. As I say, it's not clear to me what the end goal is, but isn't the Iraq War cautionary tale?
Well, let me just say one thing first. I think it is a bit much to make a moral equivalence between the Islamic Republic and Saudi Arabia. I am no fan of Saudi Arabia. I'm no fan of the Crown Prince. But, Iran has aided and abetted in the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of people in Syria. There simply is no equivalent of that on the Saudi side.
You don't think Saudi actions in Yemen are despicable?
No, I do not. I do think I think it's fair to say that one always has to be conscious of when the guns start firing, that you need to have some idea of your enemy. You need to have a good idea of what his capacity is and what his limitations are, and you need to know what your own are. But this is basic 101. If you're going to engage in any type of containment approach, however limited it may be, that by definition means that you're willing to risk a conflict. If you're going to walk away from the JCPOA and you're going to tell the Iranians, no, we're not going to permit you to gain a nuclear weapon within a decade, that means you're going to risk a conflict. This is sort of basic. The problem with Trump is that he seems at times to want it both ways. And that is that his rhetoric suggests that he might be willing to risk a conflict. But at the same time, his actions suggest that actually he's quite dovish, that he is in some ways Obama 2.0, and he's not nearly as bellicose as he seems, and he may end up being just a Twitter tiger.
And one has to wonder whether the world will look at this and see a pattern after a while. It's the guy who's bluffed much of his life and does appear to be doing exactly that. All right, we got to leave it there. I'm sure we'll get back to this. Thank you both.